Hello, Brobs. I'm back with more grandmother stories. The tales of Emily Ward as... Why am I talking in the fake British accent? This isn't the right book to do that in, bruv. The tales of Emily Ward, the sister of industrialist Eber Brock Ward, Detroit industrialist Eber Brock Ward, as published by her daughter, Frances Hurlbut. I believe this is chapter 3 or 4. A long sleigh ride. This time the children were rather cross. They all wanted to sit on Grandma's lap, and they didn't, any of them, intend to give way to any of the others. And to add to the confusion, little Eber, which was Eber's son, with his wife 31 years his junior, Catherine, who more or less inherited probably 3/4 of his $6 million wealth. Clara Ward being his sister. Clara Ward, the future Princess of Chimay. And to add to the confusion, little Eber from the other house, their Eber Brock Ward's mansion was across the street from Emily Ward's. It was said that Eber bequeathed the home to Emily once he got married because his new wife did not want the home, but newspaper articles suggest that Eber built the house for Emily since she had helped him along and helped finance him at certain points, and that the story concerning the new mansion was not true. From the other house was Uncle Eber's house, and little Eber was his youngest boy, who was just Porty's age, had come over, and he didn't want to sit anywhere, but to go off and play with Porty. Now, Jip was already in Grandma's lap. He had a way of getting in between Grandma and the child on her knee, and very politely and shrewdly, and apparently without the least intending it, shoving the child to the edge of the lap, so that it would slide off itself. The children knew that by experience, and they didn't intend to let Jip stay there. But he had the floor, so to speak, or rather the lap, and he was barking vigorously and defending his position with some skill against the combined attacks of the foe. And there's no telling what would have happened if the mamas and the aunties hadn't come to the rescue and deposited the children around in small chairs, while Jip, grinning from ear to ear, his tongue lolling out and his tail waving triumphantly, held the lap. Grandma hadn't said anything during this period of confusion and anarchy, but when quiet was restored as usual, she wanted to know what story they wanted. And as usual, one of the grown-ups spoke up and said, "This time tell us about the sleigh ride through New York from Vermont to Pennsylvania." "In the fall of 1817, said Grandma, making a sudden beginning as if she thought the sooner she got at it, the sooner it would be over. "Your great-grandfather..." Nope, there's the Saturday alarm. Speak your piece. I believe it's going to talk next. Maybe not. "In the fall of 1817, said Grandma, making a sudden beginning, as if she thought the sooner she got at it, the sooner it would be over. "Your great-grandfather went down to Kentucky in order to make a sale of salted white fish that he had taken in the way of trade with the Indians and white inhabitants, who had settled along the shores of Lake Huron and Erie. He made a successful trip from a financial point of view and was exceedingly pleased with the country, the climate, and the inhabitants, so much so that he made up his mind to move his family there the coming winter. My father was a true pioneer, said Grandma. He never went to a new place, but he wanted to pick up all his household and move there. He ought to have been a Methodist minister, and then, I don't know, that moving once a year would have satisfied him. I remember that as a very young child I hated it, and I thought when I had a home of my own I never would move, and I never did but once. My father was a great reader, and though not an active politician, took great interest in all political events. He was an ardent Whig, and later on a Free Soiler and an abolitionist. Here the children yawned and rustled around in their chairs, but Grandma didn't take any notice. I remember hearing him say when he came back from Kentucky that it was a paradise in everything but slavery. But that was a great evil, and sooner or later there would be war between the North and South on account of it. 1817 was early in the day for such a prediction, and showed that your great grandfather had a clear head. The day after the Christmas of 1817, we started on the long journey. Here the children recovered their animation. Father, mother, and 4 children were snugly tucked away in a long sleigh. It was covered with strong canvas, something after the manner of the emigrant wagons you see pictures of. 3 long chests full of linen and clothing and what household stuff it was thought best to take were arranged as seats and feather beds, covered with some kind of cloth to keep the ticks clean. Were put in the bottom of the sleigh so that we children could lie down or sit there and play if we wanted to. The sleigh was drawn by 2 stout horses, and though we felt a little sorry at leaving the uncles and aunts and grandparents, the sorrow was somewhat counterbalanced by the extraordinary preparations that had been made, and the prospect of such a long ride into the beautiful country that Father talked so much about. I remember the tears in Mother's eyes made me more unhappy than anything else as we rode away from the Vermont home that cold winter morning, amidst the tears and goodbyes and God bless yous from those who were left behind. A long journey in those days into the western wilds of Ohio, Kentucky, or Michigan usually meant that those who went would never return, and that they saw for the last time the dear home of their childhood. It was a sad parting for the older ones, but we children were too young to think much about that. A certain chest full of mince pies, donuts, fruit cake, bread, preserves, apples, and other goodies filled the imaginations of the other children, and lay a sweet thought in my own mind, though I wouldn't have said so, for I felt too old for such childishness, and undoubtedly allayed some of the pangs of parting. Then, too, children were not petted so much by their aunts and uncles as they are nowadays, and therefore were not so fond of them. It was a very cold winter. The snow creaked all the way from Vermont to Aurora at the western end of New York. But we didn't feel cold, for we were very warmly dressed in flannel from head to toe, both inside and out. Everything we children had on, except one undergarment, was made of the good strong flannel that every thrifty New England family had an abundance of. Almost every family spun wool from their own sheep, but if they had no sheep, they bought wool and spun it. "What is sheep?" said little Eber, but his nurse said, "Hush," and Grandma went on. Though I was but a little girl, not quite 9, I had helped spin the wool that had been woven into our clothes, and I felt a great pride and satisfaction in it. I thought more of those dresses than I ever thought of much finer dresses that I have had since. "Grandma," said Big Emily, "did you make the cloth too?" "No. A good old woman who lived at the foot of a great hill all alone with nobody but her big gray cat for company did our weaving for us. We children used to like to watch the shuttle fly back and forth and hear the click of the treadles after the shuttle had gone through. But I am wandering from my story. The New York of 1817 was not the New York of today. Covered with fine farms and rich cities and traversed by splendid roads, with railroads everywhere and steamers on all the navigable waters. There was not a railroad in the whole world then. "Oh, oh," cried the children, "and not many steamboats, none at all in the Great Lakes and big western rivers." And as for New York, it had very few good roads, comparatively few farms, and only 2 cities of any size, Albany and New York. Buffalo was a little town of 500 people situated in a wilderness, and Rochester had just been incorporated as a village. But it didn't make any difference to us whether there were any cities or towns in the state or not, as long as Father and Mother were with us, and we had plenty to eat and were warm and cozy in the sleigh. I don't remember what route we took, All I can remember is that we rode day after day through forests that stretched along for miles. Once in a while, we would come across a clearing with a log house, and a woman and children would look out of the window. Every noon, we would stop at some place and eat our lunch, and Father would have cider heated for us to drink to warm us up. At night, we would stop at some log tavern where we would sleep and eat a hot supper and breakfast in a big room that was both kitchen and dining room. Sometimes at a village like Utica or Syracuse, we would stay at a better tavern, but everything was primitive in this country in those days, and people lived hard and fared hard. But they were healthier and heartier than they are now, and Grandma looked about on her rather delicate descendants as if she didn't like the change. Yes, she said, I could do more work when I was your age than you four girls put together. Grandma always called the mamas and aunties girls, as if they were still little. And the girls smiled at Grandma, and the children looked at their mamas and aunties and thought they were great grown up women, ever so old. Grandma, did you see bears? Said Porty. No, I don't remember that I did, but we kept looking out for them all the time, especially Eber, and we heard the wolves howl sometimes, nights when we would be out late, and occasionally saw a panther slinking along. It was so cold that all the little animals had gone into their holes, and all the birds had gone south, and snow was everywhere. Driving along one morning, we overtook a team that was moving household goods. A boy of 10 was hanging on behind, and he looked very cold. Father shouted to the boy's father that the child was almost frozen, but the man paid no attention. When we got to the tavern, the boy was nearly dead. He could not walk and could scarcely speak. They started to carry him into the warm room, but my father would not let them and made them take him into a cold room, strip him, and rub him with snow until he was warm. I remember Father said, that man isn't fit to have children. No, indeed, said the children. And I thought, what a good father we had to keep us so warm and comfortable. Every morning and noon, he would have bricks heated through and wrapped up in cloth and put in the sleigh so as to keep it warm for us. So we rode on and on every day but Sundays for 6 weeks. When we got to Willinick in the western part of New York, Willinick is called Aurora now. Here, father and mother each had a sister married to 2 brothers by the name of Lewis. And it was here that father was sick 6 weeks with pleurisy and came very near dying. We children didn't enjoy the stay at Willinick half as much as we did the sleigh riding, and very glad we were when father was well enough to start off again. But it didn't take but a few days longer to get to Watertown in Pennsylvania, where we were to stay until navigation opened. Watertown was on French Creek, and French Creek was a branch of the Allegheny, and the Allegheny a branch of the Ohio. We were to take a boat, you see, at Watertown, and ride until we got to the Allegheny River, then down the Allegheny to the Ohio River, and there was Pittsburgh, a thriving little town even at this early date. From there on the Ohio to Cincinnati, another thriving little town. From there we were to go by land to Lexington, Kentucky. We children were delighted with the idea of such a long ride on the water, especially Eber, who always had a boat of some kind, if there was any water to float it. If it was only a toy boat in a tub, we expected to do a good deal of fishing and splashing our hands in the water and have unknown joys that we couldn't even imagine, for children are always expecting the impossible. But all our happy anticipations were brought to an end by our mother's death, which changed our father's plans entirely and altered the whole course of our lives. That it did. They did not go to Kentucky, as you shall see, and instead eventually ended up in Detroit. Goodbye.